And I am done. Okay, so I just finished up reading Kings of the Wyld. This is the first book in the series The Band by Nicholas Eames. And I wanted to give you my first impressions upon reading the book, which was just now. So, oh my gosh, this book is incredible. I can't remember the last time that I read a book that blew my mind as much as this one just did. This is the top of a 5-star rating for me. And honestly, it's one of the best books that I've ever read in my entire life. I mean, this is going to go down in my top 10, maybe top 5 favorite books that I've ever read. And I cannot get over every single part of this book worked for me. Every component of what I like about books was in here. The story, the world building, the magic, the writing, the characters. It's all there and it's all perfection. And part of what blows my mind is that I think this is his first book that he's ever written. And you're not supposed to be able to write a book this good on your first go. I did a little bit of reading, and apparently he had started writing another book that didn't get picked up by a publisher. But for his first published book to be Kings of the Wyld, wow. I mean, this guy has talent. He has it in spades. So I just want to go over some of the things that I liked about this book. But first, I need to thank Patrick Leo. He actually recommended this book to me. I reached out to him and said, I'd love you to pick a book for me to read. And I featured it on last month's TBR video. And man, he picked a good one. I need to do that more often if he's going to pick books like this. So thank you, Patrick. This book rocked. And I use that word quite liberally because this book is essentially kind of a parody of like 70s rock. But not in like the Discworld kind of way. Although this is a very funny book, I would label this as, a comedy in some ways. It doesn't rely on that, but it certainly has comedy in spades. It's one of the funnier books that I've read before. But yeah, this is a rock book. It's everything about it screams rock and roll, and that's fun. I think of epic fantasy oftentimes in that heavy metal kind of way, but this book it's overt and they make so many references to it and it's so good. So, let me break this down into what I liked about this book. And I want to start with the story. So the story is a simple one. And it's essentially a man needs to rescue his daughter. And that's a plot line that I'm sure we've all read books about, the kidnapping sort of story. It's not a kidnapping in this story. It's an ex-mercenary, and his daughter grew up to be a tough warrior like him. He did not want her to turn into this, but she did nonetheless. And she ends up fighting in this war band that goes off and ends up getting stuck in a siege with it like 100,000 people fighting against her. And she ends up holed up in this castle on the other side of the planet, and her dad needs to come rescue her. And it's a classic story, but it's not a classic story because of what the true story here is of a bunch of old heroes that get back together for one last hurrah. They've all been retired for years, and it plays off that, a band that has a reunion tour. That's very much what this book is having a play off. And it's just a fun story. The main character in this book is not the man who lost his daughter. The main character has settled down with his wife. He has his own daughter that he loves. And in the first chapter of the book, this other bandmate of his, they call them bandmates in this book because they're a war band. And so the names that they use in these things are just classic rock and roll through the whole thing. But their band has to come back together. And his best friend, the front man, the lead singer of the band, comes back and pleads with him to leave his family to come help him. And he doesn't want to do it, but eventually he gets compelled, he gets guilted into it and starts thinking, what would my daughter want me to do if she was gone? And so he goes off, and through the first, third of this book, maybe a little bit more, it's getting the band back together. So they have these journeys, several chapters each, probably like 5 or so chapters of going to each of the 5 bandmates and trying to convince them that they need to drop their lives and join this as well. And it's a wonderful story that's just chock full of 70s rock and roll, pieces of lore. If you're into that kind of thing, every chapter you're going to see a lot of different references. Somebody's name will come up, and it's obviously, a play off somebody else. There's a woman named Sabbatha, and it's clearly a Black Sabbath reference. And, I do enjoy 70s rock. I'm a little young to appreciate it, but even for me, I picked up on them. So if you were really into that, I'm sure I missed a ton. I'm sure a ton flew over my bald head, and I missed it. So yeah, you're going to love this book if that's what you're into. But even if you have no passion for rock and roll at all, I think you'll still love this book. It doesn't rely on that. It's just a bunch of like little Easter eggs throughout the book that are really fun to catch if you can catch them. But what I really appreciated about this story was this reliance on older characters past their prime. And I can't really recall sitting here outside of Assassin's Apprentice and the realm of the Elderlings, where you had a character that is old, not like ancient old, but past their prime is the feature of the story. But Realm of the Elderlings, that's not mainly what it's about. Just the last few books is the character at that age. Throughout most of the books, he's either young or right in his prime. But these books, that's what the feature is. And I love it. It's such a cool, different aspect to a story. And I kept wondering through this book, why is this not a really popular thing to do? It's so fun to read about these characters that, were like the greatest warriors of their time. And all their past is catching up to them. And everybody they run into, they don't even recognize them, but they look up to this band that they love. And it's just such a fun dynamic that I really wish that more stories, went on a limb and made their characters older. It's really fun. So the story is split up into essentially 3 different parts. You have the band coming back together, you have their journey, and then you have the conclusion to the journey in the tail end of the book. And I don't want to ruin anything more than this basic setup, but I loved this aspect of everyone come together, going on this journey and trying to complete the journey. And I won't say anything more than that because you've got to read this. I don't want to ruin anything for you, but I don't think I did. I'm sure that if you read the back blurb, you'd find out basically essentially what I just told you. So let's move over to the world building. And the world building is so good. I think this is a 2-book series. I don't know that it's done. I think there may be a 3rd book coming, but they go to a ton of different locations because of what this book is about getting the band back together and going on this journey. Every couple chapters, they're going to a new place. And the places are very well written. They're very different. You can picture them in your mind. The lore that goes into them is very well done. I love so much about the world that's been crafted here. They've got some really unique elements that make this story really compelling, and the world itself extremely interesting. And that you've got these 2 kind of halves of the world. You have almost all of civilization on the east of the map. And on the west, you have where that daughter is. And there's several cities on the west. But in the middle is this place called the Wyld. And this is where the name of the book comes from. Kings of the Wyld was their band name. And they used to go rampage through the wild and capture dangerous beasts, take contracts. And that was their thing. But in the wild, it is dangerous. There are tons of these mythical beasts and every form of every horrible thing you would imagine from a Dungeons and Dragons encyclopedia is here, and then some. But it's so intriguing, and you're like, you wish these characters would go through there. You can't wait to see their adventure that happens there, because there's so much buildup that happens, and so many of these old stories that the characters are talking about that used to be out there that you can't wait to read about it. So it's really fun having this very central forest that is just, crazy. And so super fun. The world building is just entrancing. I'm going to be thinking about this world for a long time after I finish this book, and I won't forget it. That's the hallmark of good world building to me, is when you never forget what it's like. I will never forget Westeros and all the different locations and all the different places that make it so fun. That's great world building. But there's some books where pretty quickly afterwards it just becomes, you kind of forget about it. But this is not that book. You will remember this for a very long time. So let's move over to the fantasy elements. And the fantasy elements are so cool. This book is chock full of them, but it doesn't rely on magic. There's not really, as far as I can remember, this crazy magic that happens. You have magical artifacts, you have magical weapons, you have crazy mythical beasts that are rampaging. You have all forms of dragons and wyverns and ogres and cyclopses and these huge different things and things that I've never heard of. that are rampaging through this place that they're encountering through these stories and having these epic battles with that are crazy entrancing to read about. This author does a very good job writing a battle sequence. And the fantasy elements are just so fun. I love the lore that goes into so much of these things. Every character in this book, all the main bandmates have like a signature weapon that they use, and there's this background on it, and they all have really cool abilities to them that's really fun to read about. One of these swords has crafted came here from a different dimension, and when you look at the flat side of the sword, you can see these beautiful fields that are from that other world, and I think it kind of sings or talks while it's in fighting, and it's really fun. You've got this shield that one of the characters uses that's basically impenetrable, and the story about how that came to be of felling this ancient treant that they got crafted into the shield. But yeah, the fantasy elements are all there in spades, extremely well done. Now let's go to the heart of this story, and that is the characters. This is a character-driven story. And I love fantasy books when that is the driving part of this story. The story is not the key to this, it's the characters. And let me go over them, because all 5 of them are extremely special. And not just the 5, the side characters are incredible, but I'm not going to delve too much into them. I don't want to ruin anything for you. They're really, really cool. Especially this one undead character that travels with them the whole time. I won't say anything more than that, but he's crazy interesting and funny, and I love that character. But you've got the main character of this book, who the main POV is, and that's Clay Cooper. Clay, like I said, is settled down, married, but he has to go on this adventure. He's got this, his main weapon is this shield, and he doesn't want to be on this journey, but he has to because he wants to help his best friend. He's a crazy, compelling character, and he finds out through this story, and you kind of know right at the beginning that even though he's not the front man of this band, he is the heart of this band, and he's the reason that everybody wants to join and help, and he was the one that kind of made them successful, even though he never realizes this. But yeah, he's the heart and soul of this band, and he's a very compelling character that you love seeing the POV from. I wouldn't want the POV to be from any of the other main characters. He's the one that you want. Then you've got the front man. This is Gabriel, and he's this divorced, kind of down and out character. He's trying to raise his daughter, doing a bad job, just depressed. He is, that look that you'd think in a real band of that kind of drug addled, although he's not on drugs in this book, but just, he is way past his prime, but needs to go on this journey to rescue his daughter. And he's kind of this depressing character that keeps having to get lifted up by the other ones. But yeah, very compelling on his own right. Then you have Arcandius. I don't know, I didn't listen to the audio, I read this book, but Arcandius Moog. He is this eccentric wizard. He's got this bottomless bag that has all sorts of magical items in it that he constantly uses. And they're not like this, I'm going to throw a magic grenade. It's like, I'm going to throw this apple that does this one thing. They all look super innocent, but they do these really funny things. And not crazy overpowered, but they're just powered enough to make it really funny and interesting. This character is gay. He lost his husband before this book began, and he's devoted his life to trying to solve. When people go to the Heart Wyld, oftentimes they can contract this thing called the rot, and eventually it will kill you. And that's why people don't really go to the Wyld anymore. And what makes it so interesting that these guys want to go in there to rescue that daughter. But he's devoted his life to trying to solve for mankind the mystery of why this happens and how to get a cure. But yeah, he's very funny, eccentric character, and he's the butt of a lot of jokes. He spends the whole book trying to convince everybody that an owl bear exists. He's like the only adult in the world that thinks this. It's like a child's tale, but he's really adamant that this creature exists, and he's constantly trying to, say oh, that's an owl bear. Clearly it's not, but it's really fun and super funny. And then you've got Matrix Skull Drummer, and this is he's turned into a king. He married this princess that eventually ended up queen, but he carries these dual knives, and this former kind of thief kind of character, but he's fat and a drunk, and it's very clear from the first couple pages when this character is introduced that his wife has been cheating on him, and none of his children are his. And he very much realizes it because they never have sex. but he's got these 5 kids that look nothing like him. And he's desperate to escape his wife's clutches, but she won't let him go. And it's, super funny character. And then the last guy is Ganelon, and Ganelon is the fighter. He's the warrior. He's the main guy that jumps into battle and just destroys everybody. But all these 5 come together in this amazing way, and the dynamic that they have with each other and the dialogue is so funny that it's like you're being brought into these background jokes that you kind of get a hint of. But I love that they already have their relationship well before this book has began, because they clearly all love each other dearly. But they poke and prod at each other, and they have fun with each other, but they have each other's back. And it's just such a great friendship to see these 5 characters interact with each other and the rest of the characters in the story. So let's move on to the writing style. And the writing style is magnificent. It blends this amazing comedy with a serious epic fantasy in such a beautiful way. I love the way that this guy writes. It's such a hard thing to be able to take a rock and roll parody and make it an epic fantasy and weave in these things in such a sometimes overt, sometimes subtle way, but it never feels like groan worthy. It doesn't feel ham-fisted. It naturally fits in there, and it works out so well. Even, I don't want to ruin anything, but as the book gets further along, the analogies to a band coming together and having a final show and all these things are really just so fun to read about. And yeah, I don't think this guy's written very many books, but the moment he writes another book, I'm going to be all over it. I can't wait to get to the second one. So as a recap, go read this book. What are you doing? If you haven't read this book, drop the book you're reading. Go pick up Kings of the Wyld. It is incredible. I can't say enough positive things about it if it hasn't been clear in this video. It's one of my favorite books I've ever read. And I don't get to say that very often. I'm a picky reader. I oftentimes dislike these really popular books. And I figured, maybe that would happen here because so many people are talking about it, but that is not the case. Go get Kings of the Wyld. Do yourself a favor. Treat yourself and enjoy this book. So that's my review. Thanks for watching and happy reading to you.